Hello there and welcome to Weather Snap. It's the 9th of June. It's a Friday. I'm Clare Nasir.
And I'm Alex Deakin.
Coming up on Weather Snap, we have the latest of the heat health alerts covering much of central and southern parts of England and also water scarcity in Scotland. Yes, there are concerns there, particularly for the northwest of Scotland. But first of all, let's just touch base with what's happening with El Nino. Now, over the last, year, if not longer, we've been talking on Weather Snap about La Nina, which saw a triple dip. So a very strong La Nina, which brought with it some impacts.
Can I correct your pronunciation there? Because I've got
La Nina.
GCSE Spanish. She said that you need the nia. It's na niña, la niña. There's a little thing on it. So just El
You
Niño
went to a
and
school where
La
they studied
Niña.
Spanish. I didn't even do French.
You didn't even do French.
Well, I did. I found it. Okay. Firstly, El Nino. Is that right?
Yeah. And what's the other one?
La Nina.
Niña.
Nina. Anyway, we had a triple dip, Alex,
Yes,
and
we
it brought
did.
with it its own impacts, including quite a lot of heavy rain across Australia. But there were, it touches every part of the globe. Now, this week, the US Weather Service have declared an El Nino.
So there's two main bodies that declare whether El Nino's happened or not. The Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, but also NOAA, the American Weather Service. And it's them who've declared this one. The Bureau of Meteorology in Australia haven't declared El Nino yet. They have slightly different criteria, so it is slightly different. Here at the Met Office, we use both. But yeah, what's been declared is by the American Weather Service that El Nino is happening. It's the waters across the eastern side of the South Pacific, and they reach a certain temperature, a certain threshold, and it is very much threshold led by the Bureau of Meteorology, and they haven't quite ticked their box yet, so they haven't announced it yet. But we've been tracking this, and all the forecast models have been suggesting El Nino is going to happen. And now, as I say, the American Weather Service have declared that it is happening.
So check out the website for that, the NOAA website. Have you ever been to Chile, Alex?
I haven't been to Chile. No, I'd quite like to go. Quite like to fancy going to the Atacama Desert, where the cool thing about where they trap the mist, don't they, to make where it doesn't rain for decades at a time, but they trap the mist to generate water. I'd love to go and see that.
Yeah, it is amazing. I've seen it, and they just water their aloe vera plants with it. So it's notoriously a very dry part of the world, and the reason why is because normally the waters close by across the eastern side of the South Pacific are very cold. It's the Humboldt Current, and I've swam in the Humboldt Current, almost got attacked by sea lions, and it is really cold, actually.
Almost got attacked by sea lions. I mean, that's a podcast in itself.
Yeah, it was a piece of camera for the BBC. I would never do it if there wasn't money involved and a camera. But anyway, back to the moment in hand. What happens during our La Nina? The waters get even colder. So the air is very cold. It doesn't produce any cloud, and that region stays very dry. During an El Nino, I hope I pronounced that correctly, warmer waters sort of emerge from the equatorial currents from the north. And so what that means, lots of different local changes. So the clouds form in the sky, they get a lot of rain. The anchovies, which is pretty much a staple for the Peruvians and the Chileans, tend to just either dive under the thermocline, go somewhere else, or they die because the waters are so warm. But it does have other impacts, doesn't it? And it's a global phenomenon.
So the impacts vary across the globe, and they're very different. So you do get more rains in Peru and Chile, which is normally, as you say, very dry indeed. But you do then get heavier rains in other parts of the world. In Australia as well, you get the impact because during a La Nina, the warmer waters move towards Australia, so they get heavier rain, as we've seen over recent years with La Nina. But with El Nino, it tends to be drier in Australia as well. But again, the rains move into different parts of the world. And it's not just the rains, of course, with the lack of rains when it's dry, the risk of drought, obviously, but also then an increased chance of bushfires across parts of Australia too with El Nino. So there's lots of complicated things that happen in that area, but also it can have knock-on effects around the globe as well. It impacts the weather quite significantly further north, across North America, particularly on the western side, and California is influenced quite a lot by the weather in El Nino. It can also influence the weather in terms of the number of hurricanes that we see around the globe in the Atlantic, and lots of other impacts. But the further away you get from the source, if you like, the further then the weaker those interactions are. So any links to UK weather are pretty tenuous.
And there's obviously always concerns when we talk about global temperature, because an El Nino can add a certain level of heat across the globe. So when we see an El Nino, you can pretty much suggest that there's probably about 0.2 of a degree of an influence from this phenomena. And collectively, it's called ENSO, which is the El Nino southern oscillation. So it's like a seesaw, one way and another, dry, wet, dry, wet. And it's a natural change from one to another every 2 to 7 years, but it does also have impacts in terms of heat, which is really our greatest concern right now. So that's happening right now. We'll keep you posted when Australia declares it as well, but it's certainly going in that direction. And for some, not particularly good news, to be honest. But now let's just bring you the latest global headlines from around the world, because there's a lot going on. There's been a lot going on this week, which has hit headlines internationally, Alex.
Yes, we've seen pictures from the United States. We'll touch on that in a moment as well. But let's start with Haiti. Torrential rain last week across Haiti caused fatalities and left thousands without powers. Thousands of homes in Haiti have been flooded. Heavy rains last weekend. Intense rainfall caused rivers to overflow, caused extensive flooding, flash floods, landslides as well, according to a recent United Nations report. So, yeah, some pretty serious weather caused by a convergence line, convergence lines where winds combine. So one wind coming one direction hits another wind coming another direction. It combines. They can't go down. It can only go up. So that rising air creates an increase in the amount of thunderstorms that we see. And Tropical Storm Arlene as well, to the northwest of Cuba, was involved, the first tropical storm of the Atlantic season. So it's all been going off in this part of the world, created heavy, heavy downpours.
Yes, they saw up to around 400 to 500 millimeters of rain over a number of days during the early part of June. That's just sounds horrific. It really does. 13,000 people displaced by that event. So a slow moving area of storms really caused chaos there. And it's not over yet. So all eyes are now on Cuba, where we're seeing another disturbance, and we're expecting a lot of rain across the island as we head through the weekend and into next week. So yes, lots of pretty bad, heavy weather there.
Let's head to North America now. We touched on it a moment ago with, you can't fail to have seen the pictures across social media of the orange skies, best way to describe it, perhaps in New York, but also across other parts of the northeast of the United States, created by the Canadian wildfires. We've been talking about these for a number of weeks. And actually the weather patterns have been stuck. Something I touched on in the 10-day trend this week about how not just the UK's weather pattern has been stuck in a rut for a number of weeks, but it's been right across the Northern Hemisphere. The jet's been stuck in a certain wave pattern, and that's allowed the pressure patterns to remain pretty stationary. And as a result of that, we've seen the heat building across Canada and the wildfires, but that's also then generated this wind flow that's pushed the smoke from the wildfires across the northeast of the United States, and hence why we've seen all those dramatic pictures coming out of New York. Absolutely horrific conditions by all accounts. Many sporting events had to be cancelled, but people reporting you can't even go outside. It hurts to breathe after just a few minutes in New York. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible, and obviously huge impacts for health there. If you look at the satellite picture, you can see the zone of smoke, and it's huge. It really is. In fact, there's pollution alerts right as far south as South Carolina. So that's a massive area and a huge area of low pressure, as I said, which is not moving very far, very fast. And sadly, the Quebec wildfires continue into the weekend, which doesn't bode well in terms of obviously the devastation through the fire, but also the heat associated with it, and further smoke and dust and dirt and everything else associated with this, the debris from those fires. And some parts are still under a red alert, including New York, Washington, and Philadelphia.
Now you can correct me on my pronunciation, because we're going to move to the Arabian severe cyclonic storm in the Arabian Sea, which is, I believe, called Biporjoy. Biporjoy? Is that right? Is that the right pronunciation? The Bangladeshi for disaster. So it's a useful name for it, an apt name for it. Storm in the Arabian Sea. Winds currently, time of recording, around 85 miles an hour. It's not an especially powerful storm when you compare to other typhoons around the world or severe Atlantic hurricanes. But of course, this is part of the world. It doesn't get often these kind of storms, or doesn't get them that frequent, not the really powerful ones. So that kind of wind could cause some problems. Still a way away from land, and still a bit of uncertainty, isn't there, about exactly where it's going to go.
Well, the good news is this isn't really a disastrous storm at the moment. It's across open waters and it's moving very slowly. But the jury's out as to where it will make landfall. So the US models are suggesting it's heading sort of northwestwards, pushing towards Oman. However, the EC model and our Met Office model is suggesting it will head towards northwest India and Pakistan. The Indian Met Service are taking a sort of a midpoint there, and they're pushing it just towards the north. So it's definitely a watch point. This is all sort of unfolding through the weekend and into next week. And it's going to be more of a rainfall event by this point. So the winds will ease. It's very slow moving, but even so.
Yeah, and again, potentially hitting areas that aren't used to a lot of rain, as you might imagine, particularly if it heads towards the Arabian Peninsula. So something to keep a close eye on.
And finally, globally, let's just head to the Atlantic, where there was an unusual storm which developed across the mid-Atlantic, and it was named by the Spanish Met Service as Storm Oscar. Now, we've been talking about this storm throughout the week on weather broadcasts, because it will have some indirect impact across the UK. And Alex will talk about that in a moment. But this was a deep area of low pressure. It had some subtropical characteristics. So it's been carrying on for quite a lot of time, lots of energy entrained within the storm, quite a tight center as well. So some strong winds, certainly severe gales and heavy rain across Madeira, Azores, as well as the Canaries. And there's this umbrella of influence which extended across Iberia, where we saw a lot of cloud and some thundery downpours also for Gibraltar, and impacts further north and northeast towards France, even West Germany and the Low Countries. The chance and the forecast for some thunderstorms into the weekend, and also here in the UK.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it's influencing our weather indirectly. We've been talking about it in our broadcast. We haven't really been naming it as Storm Oscar because it's not really going to affect us, but it will have had serious impact on a lot of people on holiday in those locations, Madeira and the Canaries in particular. Expecting late May, early June to have some nice, fine, sunny weather. But yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Lots of heavy showers right across mainland Spain and Portugal as well. As you said, it's kind of indirectly affecting our weather. It's giving the high pressure a shunt. So this high pressure that's been dominating our weather for many, many weeks now is finally edging away. It's not disappearing completely. It's kind of re-establishing itself across Scandinavia. So the high has been to the northwest of the UK, but it's moving up towards Scandinavia as a result of the low pushing up from the south, but also as a result of another low developing near Greenland. So the high is shifting. So our weather is on the change this weekend. It's going to turn hotter. That's the main thing. It's going to turn more humid. And at this time of year, obviously, humidity likely to spark thunderstorms. So we are expecting some heavy showers. I've issued a warning today for parts of the UK for Saturday for heavy showers and thunderstorms. Not everywhere will be affected because it's summer storms. So as you know, some places get a storm and 10 miles away, it's completely dry. It's the nature of summer storms. But we are expecting some to develop through the course of this weekend. And that will be a big change, as will be the temperatures. Many parts of the UK haven't seen 25 degrees yet. But actually, we're talking about the potential for reaching 30 Celsius on Saturday. And of course, much of the east, where it has been so cold and it has been so grey for, again, a number of weeks, they're actually going to see quite a big jump in temperatures.
It's going to be a bit of a shock to the system, to be honest, isn't it? From 13 degrees to possibly 26 when the cloud breaks. And also with the humidity, because the air has been quite cold. Certainly Northern Ireland, Northern England, Southern Scotland seen really quite low temperatures by night and some chilly old nights and some warm days. And then, a change of weather type and the whole feel to the air changes.
Yes, it's going to properly feel like those summer warm nights. We're not talking tropical nights. That's the definition where temperatures stay above 20 Celsius. Not getting that warm yet, but temperatures are likely to stay in the mid or even high teens in conurbations across the southwest. And like you say, even further north, it's going to be much, much warmer than it has been. Even earlier this week, temperatures were not far off freezing through parts of Scotland. So temperatures overnight much more likely to stay in double figures, if not higher. So you will notice that as well.
And we have been talking about through the week the heat health alert. Certainly, there's been a lot of talk about it in the media. And this is a partnership that we have with UKHSA. It basically is a service to inform health professionals when we are seeing a surge in temperature.
It's different to our heat warnings. This is more, as you say, aimed not at the general public. It's for vulnerable people, but also that broader envelope of health professionals, because it's useful for them to know when they could see an increase in problems due to higher temperatures.
And this service is only for England. So it's worth pointing that out. And we will see some high temperatures also across the rest of the country. So Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland could see a 26 on Saturday. So I've been told by our very own Peter Sloss, who's based in Aberdeen.
The legend
Yes,
that is Peter Sloss.
And in fact, I was discussing with Peter about the distribution of thunderstorms through the weekend, because in a moment we're going to be talking more about water scarcity in Scotland. But what his concern is the ground is so dry there. Even if you catch one intense burst, it's going to bounce off the land, and we could see some localized flooding. So even though they're likely to be scattered, and many areas may not actually see any at all, where you do see one, it could actually be quite intense, and it could run into some sort of flash flooding problems. So it's worth staying sort of alert of the forecast, and obviously the Nowcast. Check out our weather app. You can see exactly where the thunderstorms are developing and where they're moving to, and they are migrating north through the weekend.
Yeah, greatest chance I'd say in Scotland will be Sunday. But yeah, like you say, it's the classic example of a summer thunderstorm. One of the problems is they contain more rain than winter storms, thunderstorms generally, because the air is warmer, so it's holding more moisture, it drops more moisture, but also that chance that the ground is harder, and so it just runs off faster as well, and doesn't absorb, and it creates the flooding problem.
One of the reasons why we're talking about this is because this week, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency issued their latest water scarcity report, and it's not looking good at all. On the report, they deliver information based on how much water is available for certain populations around the country, and they divide the country into regions. And for the northwest of Scotland, certainly the Northwest Highlands, including Ullapool, it's now on a moderate water scarcity risk, which is pretty high for Scotland, considering they do get a lot of rain. But Alex and I, we've been looking at what's been happening over the last few months to actually allow this situation to occur. And it could actually get worse before it gets better, because the outlook is still looking dry. And in fact, Alex, first of all, let's talk about March this year, because March this year was the 6th wettest March on record.
Yeah, 6 wettest. That's across the UK as a whole. I've got the map in front of me here. You can see it's very dark blue across the south. So from the Midlands, South Wales, southern England, that was where it was particularly wet, well above average. But there is that little patch of brown across the far northwest. So even though March was the 6th wettest March on record across the UK as a whole, northwest Scotland was actually slightly drier than average through March, because we had mostly kind of that south shifted jet. So a lot of the low pressure systems were heading across England and Wales, which is why March was so wet here. But in the northwest, it wasn't that wet. So March is quite an interesting one, as is always the case. You generalize these averages across the whole country, but there's always the regional detail.
And April, similar situation. Average rainfall across many parts, wet in the southeast and very dry towards the northwest. And in fact, May was a mostly dry month, looking at our map here. Lots of browns on the map representing below average rainfall. However, look towards the northwest of Scotland, and you've got pretty much only 20% of its average monthly rainfall. So again, a massive deficit in water. So anyway, I caught up earlier with a representative SEPA who told me what's happening, why this report has been brought out now, and what we can expect in the next few weeks. Janine Hensman, thank you very much for joining us. You're head of Water Resources Unit across Scotland for SEPA, and obviously you're involved in the water scarcity report. First of all, tell me, what is this report? How long has it been going for, and why is it so important?
Yes, that's right. SEPA issues water scarcity reports every week throughout the summer months. This assesses the risk of water scarcity using weekly soil moisture data from the Met Office, our rainfall data, river flow data and groundwater data, and also the Met Office's weather forecast for the coming days. So the risk of water scarcity is then categorised using this data into 4 levels. We have early warning to start with, which then ramps up to alert, moderate, and then significant water scarcity. The report also gives a forward look as to whether any rainfall is forecast, again using data from the Met Office. And we also outline advice and guidance to water users and abstractors and include links to more detailed information.
Okay, so we know how dry it's been. Give us a little bit more context across Scotland about the situation right now.
Scotland only received 44% of its long-term average rainfall across the country in May. And in Loch Ness, in the Inverness area in the northwest, that was one of the driest areas in the UK in May. And some areas only received a third of their rainfall that month. And the winter and spring recharge was below average as well. In fact, one of our river gauging stations in the Ness areas hit its lowest level ever, which is just illustrating how dry it currently is.
So the latest report is now out. It has been published. Can you explain where we're at in terms of level of risk?
The latest report shows the area most severely affected at the moment is in the northwest, in the Loch Marie area. So we've had extremely low flows there for over 30 days. Hence, that means that we categorise that as significant water scarcity, which is the highest level in our categories. The surrounding areas in the Northwest Highlands, extending down Loch Ness, are also experiencing low flows, as is the Esk down in Dumfriesshire in south of Scotland. And in fact, most of the rest of the country is at alert, which is kind of unprecedented for this early in the year.
So obviously it's all about now saving water. What are the impacts if we don't go down that road?
Yes, well, with little rainfall forecast in the coming weeks, the situation could escalate quite quickly. When an area reaches significant water scarcity, then SEPA considers additional regulatory action to protect the environment. And this is true where we have abstraction licenses that don't have a kind of low flow protection in them. So we may have to restrict the use of water for some abstractors. But obviously SEPA are working closely with all our water users and our partners to try and communicate that and offer advice to try and avoid any restrictions in the future.
Any advice of what we can do? People living across Scotland, obviously, but even, I mean, it's general advice for saving water. I mean, we are now going into another dry spell after some thunderstorms, which is not effective rain. So give us some guidelines. What do you suggest?
That's right. Well, just at home, people can be mindful of using their water wisely. Scottish Water, for example, are promoting their messages to consumers trying to use less water, and in particular, asking people not to water their grass. A garden hose uses about 1,000 litres an hour, which is the same as a family for a whole day. So that's really good advice.
Janine Hensman from SEPA, thank you very much. So we mentioned earlier about the fact that actually the weather looks like, despite the fact we'll see some thunderstorms, we could see another settled spell. So Alex, first of all, I want to know where it will be, where will the high pressure be? And is the east still going to be blighted by clouds?
Better news for these this weekend, as we will start to see a shift where the winds go southerly. We talked earlier about the high pressure moving to Scandinavia, but yeah, a lot of the signals next week that high is going to move back. Again, talked about it in the 10-day trend, if you want to catch that on our YouTube channel. But the signal for next week is that the high moves back initially across the UK, but then potentially back out where it was, so out to the northwest, which would again generate those easterly winds down the eastern side. As the high moves back in, chance of showers reduces. So we have this thunderstorm risk Saturday, Sunday, and Monday as well. And slow moving thunderstorms as well, because the winds are light. But then it looks like next week that high pressure is going to edge back in. And that could regenerate those easterly winds again and bring a cool, cloudy feel again to the east. And again, it'll be west is best for sunshine. And that's where we'll see the top temperatures. But with high pressure likely to continue to dominate, we are going to go back to that mostly dry weather as well, which, although not a problem for much of the country yet, it's something we need to monitor and keep our eyes on, because Mumbles in South Wales hasn't had any rainfall for 30 days now. Anglesey has had, I think, 13, maybe 14 days of 12 hours of sunshine in a row. So that's just an example of how sunny it has been.
But I have to say the eastern side of the country comes into its own later on in the summer, doesn't it? When the sea surface temperature warms up. I mean, I only lived for 2 years in East Anglia, but you were brought up on the eastern side, and they call it a lazy wind when you get that easterly wind. It just goes through you. And
but it's been so persistent. I mean, that is really unusual how long it's been.
Anyway, the best thing about our weather, eventually it does change. And so, we just establish a new balance at some point. That's all I'm going to say for now. Now, talking about extremes, let's head over to Ollie Claydon, who has last week's highs and lows.
Here are the UK weather extremes for the week beginning 29th of May. The hottest place last week was Porthmadog in Gwynedd, where 25 degrees was recorded on Sunday the 4th of June. Kinbrace in Sutherland was the coldest place. The temperature there dipped to minus 2.6 Celsius on Friday the 2nd. It was another very dry week with negligible rainfall. However, 2 millimetres of rainfall was recorded at South Newington in Oxfordshire on Wednesday. And while most places saw extensive sunshine, it was Morecambe in Lancashire that took the record for the week, receiving 16 hours of sunshine on Saturday the 3rd of June.
Thank you very much, Ollie.
Thanks very much. Tune in next week for another exciting episode of Weather Snap. But from us for this week, it's goodbye. Another great Weather Snap, Claire. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Then you catch all of our daily weathers on YouTube as well.
And if podcasts are your thing, check out our Met Office podcast channel. Lots of information, lots of stories there. And we'll see you again next week.